Everyone harbors a deep, soul-freezing fear, so terrifying that even thinking about it can steal your joy and leave you trembling. Just as every soul harbors such a haunting dread, so did a woman named Zuri. Years ago, Zuri had married the love of her life, a man whose presence alone once made her heart flutter and whose smile could light up her darkest days. His name was Jabari, a strikingly handsome man with charm that turned heads and a lifestyle that many envied. Jabari worked as a stockbroker at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. His job demanded much of his time and attention, often keeping him away for days, sometimes weeks. But what he lacked in presence, he more than made up for in wealth. The rewards of his high-stakes career were vast, and Zuri never lacked for anything, at least not in material things. In the initial stage of their marriage, Zuri found herself cloaked in an aching kind of loneliness, the kind that echoes through empty hallways and fills the silence of late-night dinners eaten alone. She would often plead with Jabari, her voice laced with both hope and desperation, to find a way to balance his career and their life together. She longed for shared mornings, slow evenings, and the warmth of his presence. But no matter how heartfelt her words, nothing changed. Jabari wished he could give her more. In the rare quiet moments they shared, he would hold her close and whisper promises that someday things would be different, that the storm of meetings and market calls would pass. Yet the whirlwind of his profession always seemed to swallow those promises whole. His schedule remained unrelenting, his absence a constant shadow over their home. To the outside world, theirs was a picture-perfect union, one that inspired envy and admiration. Friends and strangers alike looked at Zuri and Jabari and saw only the gloss. The luxurious lifestyle, the elegant dinners, the vacations captured in smiling photos. But behind the smiles were wounds. Wounds not of betrayal, at least not then, but of neglect, slow, silent, and suffocating. As the years unfolded, Zuri's once vocal pain faded into quiet acceptance. She stopped complaining. She no longer waited up every night, no longer asked when he would be home, no longer begged for weekends away. Instead, she adapted. She grew strong in solitude and built her days around stability and grace. Through it all, she remained faithful, not just in body, but in heart and thought. Not once did she let her eyes or emotions wander. Men tried, oh how they tried, to fill the void Jabari had left behind, but Zuri was unwavering. She was a woman of virtue, anchored by the sacred weight of the vows she had spoken on her wedding day. In her world, loyalty wasn't optional, it was absolute. Sadly, the same couldn't be said of Jabari. It turns out that while Jabari was starving his wife of his presence, another woman somewhere was feasting on every bit of it: his time, his attention, his warmth, his energy. Life has a cruel way of testing our vows, and Jabari's test came wrapped in charm and danger. To be fair, he hadn't set out to betray Zuri, but temptation, when it wears a soft smile and walks with the grace of intention, can be far more persuasive than we like to admit. Her name was Anne, a stunning spinster in her late 20s, with eyes that held secrets and lips that curled in calculated sweetness. She wasn't just beautiful, she was skilled. Anne was one of those rare women who understood the raw, magnetic power she carried, and sadly, many women never unlock that part of themselves. Jabari met Anne on an evening that started off innocently enough. He was out at a fine restaurant, seated at a polished wooden table, surrounded by his business associates. Laughter flowed like wine, and deals were being toasted too. But all of it faded the moment Jabari saw her, sitting across the room, in direct line of sight. Anne, she wasn't doing much, just existing with a quiet confidence. Yet Jabari couldn't keep his eyes off her. He tried. Oh, how he tried to focus on the conversation at hand, to redirect his gaze, to steady his heartbeat. But Anne's aura had already ensnared him. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Anne was no stranger to being watched, but there was something particularly satisfying about the way Jabari looked at her, like a man trying to convince himself he wasn't already lost. She made subtle gestures, nothing overt or vulgar, just enough to reel him further in, a light tilt of her head, a slow sip of her wine, the way her fingers grazed the stem of her glass. It was a silent seduction, and Jabari, caught between guilt and desire, found it harder and harder to resist. Dinner ended, but the battle wasn't over. Jabari and his associates stood to leave, and Anne saw her moment. She rose too, phone pressed against her ear in mock conversation, her eyes fixed just enough to make it all seem like coincidence. As she approached, she angled her steps and, with precise calculation, collided with Jabari. "Ouch! My wrist hurts," she gasped, her phone slipping from her fingers and hitting the floor with a clatter. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking. Are you hurt?" Jabari asked instinctively, startled. I twisted my wrist," she said, wincing dramatically. Jabari bent down and retrieved her phone, then gently reached for her hand. "I really don't know much about bones," he said, concern lacing his voice. "But I can take you to a clinic or hospital if it's serious." Anne looked up at him with soft, grateful eyes, like a woman who had just found a knight in shining armor. "I'd really appreciate that," she replied, carefully not smiling too much. And just like that, the trap was sealed. Without wasting time, they walked side by side to Jabari's sleek black car parked in the hotel lot. And within moments, the engine purred to life as they drove off to the nearest clinic. The ride was quiet, filled with unspoken tension and the occasional stolen glance. At the clinic, Anne was swiftly attended to by a nurse, who gently massaged her supposedly twisted wrist. She winced, more for effect than pain, and Jabari stood by, concern etched across his face. "Thank you for everything. I truly appreciate it," Anne said, her voice soft and laced with warmth after the treatment. "It's okay. Where do you live? I can drop you off before I head back to the hotel," Jabari offered, pulling his car keys from his pocket. "Don't worry about it," she replied, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I live close by. I'll take myself home." But he insisted. He pressed further, politely yet persistently, until she finally gave in with a gentle nod. "All right," she said, flashing him a smile that lingered too long. They drove for a short while, the silence between them, thick with unspoken attraction. When they arrived at her destination, Anne unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, looked over at him, and said once more, "Like I said before, thanks for everything." This time, her eyes sparkled mischievously, and she added a slow, deliberate blink, seductive and intentional. "You're welcome," Jabari replied, and then, without thinking, the words spilled from his lips. "You're pretty, you know." Anne turned away slightly, hiding a blush that might have been genuine, or perfectly staged. "Thanks," she said coyly, "and you're quite handsome too." That simple exchange opened a dam. They talked, lingering in the car, and Jabari felt more drawn to her with each passing second. He didn't understand it. There was something almost spell-like about Anne, an unplaceable pull that made it hard to remember Zuri, hard to remember the life he had vowed to protect. He wanted to walk away. He told himself it was just a spark, a moment, and he could shut it down, go back to the hotel, and forget. But something in him didn't move. He sat there, captivated. What Jabari didn't know was that Anne knew exactly what she was doing. Every move that evening, the glance across the restaurant, the deliberate collision, the feigned injury, had been carefully orchestrated. Anne didn't stumble into his path. She carved it. After nearly 30 minutes of talk that blurred the line between flirtation and confession, they exchanged numbers and finally parted ways. Jabari drove back to his hotel, but Anne's image haunted him. Her soft voice, her confident gaze, the curves she didn't try to hide. He didn't just remember, he fantasized. Meanwhile, Anne walked only a short distance from the building Jabari had dropped her at and knocked on a different door entirely. After 3 firm knocks, the door creaked open and revealed a tall, handsome man with sleepy eyes and a strong frame. "Hey baby, I missed you," Anne said, her voice suddenly more playful. She stepped inside the doorway, smiling as she leaned into him. "Where have you been?" "I've been waiting," the man asked, eyebrows raised. She grinned. "Blame the traffic, baby. I left my house 3 hours ago. Now give me a kiss." He chuckled, tugged on her shirt gently, pulled her in, and planted a kiss on her lips. Then, without a word, he led her inside and shut the door behind them. Anne laughed softly and whispered, "Now you're talking." That man, just one of many, was another piece of the puzzle, another page in her secret book of lovers. Anne lived a double life with the grace of an actress and the cunning of a fox. After a night of passion and whispered lies, Anne left before sunrise and returned to her actual home. Once inside, she stripped off her clothes and stepped into the shower, where she sat under the cascading water for what felt like hours. The steam filled the room, but it couldn't soften the thoughts swirling in her mind. Despite her outward strength, there was something broken inside her, something hollow. She sat curled under the water's warmth, silently sobbing, her tears mixing with the shower's stream. Her world, all the games, all the men, sometimes left her feeling empty, used, and alone, but there was no turning back now. She had mastered the art of seduction and survival, and softness was a luxury she couldn't afford. Then, the shrill sound of her phone interrupted the silence. Startled, Anne got up, wrapped a towel around her, and padded over to where she'd dropped her phone. One glance at the screen and she knew, even before answering, who it was. Jabari. She straightened her voice and picked up the call. "Hello," she answered sweetly. "Hi, this is Jabari." His voice came through the line, calm but unsure. "I hope I'm not calling at the wrong time." "Not at all," Anne said quickly. "In fact, I was expecting your call." They talked briefly, laughter peppering the conversation as if they were old friends. Then Jabari, struggling to disguise his eagerness, asked, "I have a business meeting later today, but I'll be free afterwards. Would you like to meet up again, maybe have lunch?" Anne didn't hesitate. "I'd love that," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. And just like that, another layer of the trap was set. Lunch was scheduled, and Anne, the master of illusion, was already planning her next move. That very day, while Jabari sat sipping drinks and battling temptation, Anne had a different kind of urgency. She had a doctor's appointment to attend, one that couldn't wait. She rushed down to the hospital with calculated precision, knowing exactly what she needed. After her regular checkups were done, Anne hurried to the hospital pharmacy. Her face wore its usual polite expression, charming, unassuming. "Good day, ma'am," she greeted cheerfully as she stepped to the counter. "Hello, Anne. How are you doing today?" The nurse responded with a smile. "I'm fine, thank you. Please, can I get my drugs?" Anne asked. "Of course, just give me 1 second." The nurse disappeared briefly into the storage room and returned with a small box packed with several sachets and bottles of antiretroviral drugs, a supply meant to last a few months. As Anne quietly packed the drugs into her handbag, the nurse paused, then casually asked the question that made time freeze. "What's your greatest source of encouragement as an HIV patient?" Anne looked up. Her eyes didn't flicker, not even for a second. She smiled faintly. I guess I'd say the belief that I'm bigger than the virus. That someday I'll live a full life without shame." The nurse nodded thoughtfully. They exchanged a few more words before parting ways, the tone calm, but the weight of what had just been said silently following Anne like a shadow. She left the hospital, her mind focused now not on medication, but the date ahead. Back at home, she took a long, hot shower, then stood before her closet, shifting through outfits with a practiced eye. Nothing felt quite right. Too casual, too dull, too revealing, too modest. She needed something perfect, something that would hold Jabari spellbound without screaming for attention. After a long session of trial and error, she finally settled on a fitted rose gold dress that clung gently to her curves like silk on fire. With her hair tied up and light makeup to accentuate her features, Anne was a walking illusion, soft, elegant, dangerous. By the time she was done, the clock had betrayed her. She was 30 minutes late for her scheduled meetup with Jabari. At that point, Jabari had finished his business meeting and was lounging at the poolside bar of the hotel. The sky was just beginning to wear the golden hues of early evening. A soft breeze danced across the water, but Jabari's eyes were fixed on the entrance, waiting. The moment he saw her, he subtly adjusted his drink on the table, making space for hers, anticipation flickering in his eyes. "Look who's here," he exclaimed, rising a little from his seat. "You're welcome. Come have a seat and join me." Anne smiled, leaned in, and gave him a friendly peck on the cheek before gracefully taking her seat. "It seems you were busy today, hence the lateness," he teased, taking a sip from his glass. "I know, right?" Anne replied, adjusting the strap of her dress. "I was held back due to something urgent and couldn't make it at the appointed time. Sorry for keeping you waiting." Jabari shrugged casually, but the smile on his face betrayed how pleased he was to see her. "It's fine. You're here now." The waiter arrived just in time, and Anne ordered a light cocktail with a teasing smile. Their conversation meandered through random topics: music, travel, work, little jokes here and there. But beneath the surface of their words was a slow-burning tension neither of them could ignore. Jabari laughed at her jokes, nodded at her stories, But the truth was, he was distracted. Her dress clung to her body, like it was tailored by temptation itself. Every time Anne shifted in her seat, the fabric followed like a shadow, accentuating curves that seemed designed to drive restraint to its knees. Jabari tried to keep his eyes focused on her face, on the glass in front of him, on anything other than the body that sat just across from him. But it was a losing battle. Anne knew it. She caught every glance, every pause, every flicker of desire that crossed his face like a pulse. She didn't need to ask if he was captivated. It was written all over him. And she didn't need to try too hard either. An hour passed. The sky darkened and the pool lights flickered on, casting soft reflections over the water. The playful tone of their conversation had dimmed into something slower, heavier, a kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Jabari shifted in his seat. His conscience stirred. He looked at Anne, radiant and dangerous in the low lighting, and then thought of Zuri, his wife, his anchor, the woman who had never given him a reason to stray. Zuri had the same kind of beauty, but hers was softer, sacred, steady. She had been nothing but faithful, waiting patiently for a husband who was always too busy. What was he doing here? His heart twisted. He considered cutting the evening short. Maybe he could drive Anne home, offer a polite goodbye, and return to his hotel room alone, unscathed. But Anne was quicker. She could feel the shift in his energy, and she wasn't about to let go that easily. She leaned in just slightly, enough for him to inhale the sweet scent of her perfume. "I'm feeling quite cold out here," she said softly, her voice like silk dragged across skin. "Aren't you?" Jabari knew where this was going. Still, he held the line, barely. "Should I take you home?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Anne tilted her head and met his eyes with a mischievous smile. I really don't want to go home yet," she replied, her voice thick with suggestion. "I was hoping we could maybe go back to your hotel room." Jabari froze for half a second, but the decision had already made itself. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak more. They rose, and together they walked quietly through the hotel hallways, each step louder than the last in the silence of Jabari's mind. When they reached the room, he opened the door and let her in. The suite was expansive, high ceilings, velvet curtains, cream-colored walls, a plush couch set, and a king-size bed that looked like it had never known sleep. The air smelled of cologne and polished wood. Anne took it all in as she stepped out of her heels, one at a time, with the grace of a ballerina. She sat on the edge of the couch, crossing her legs slowly, letting her eyes roam the space like a lioness, surveying new territory. Jabari went to the mini-fridge in the corner, trying to distract himself, pretending to be calm, as he grabbed a chilled bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Behind him, he could hear the faint sound of Anne's bangles jingling as she shifted, the soft sigh she let out when she sank deeper into the couch, and the unmistakable thrill of tension hanging in the room like perfume. When Jabari returned to the couch with 2 glasses of wine, he looked calm on the outside, but inside he was in a storm. He handed her a glass, their fingers brushing briefly, sparking a jolt of tension neither of them acknowledged aloud. They clinked glasses and took their first sip. Anne's eyes lingered on the ring that circled Jabari's finger like a silent warning. "I see a ring," she said with a sly smirk. "Are you married?" Jabari gave a faint, almost defiant smile and answered without hesitation. "Yes, I am." Something about the way he said it, honest, unapologetic, turned Anne on even more. Forbidden fruit was always sweeter, and Jabari was ripe for the picking. "Can I ask you something?" she inquired, her voice low, teasing. "Sure," he replied, meeting her gaze. "Do you want me?" she asked bluntly, her words slicing through the air like a sharp blade. Jabari froze. Her question hit him hard, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he did. The way she asked it, the boldness in her voice, stripped away the last veil of pretense between them. "Why are you asking?" he murmured, already knowing the answer. Anne leaned in, her voice a seductive whisper. "Because I want to make sure we're on the same page. There's nothing I want more right now than to rip your clothes off." Jabari's body tensed. His mind screamed for him to leave, to run, to remember Zuri. But Anne was fire, the kind that draws moths to its flame, and he was burning slowly. She placed her wineglass down and gently took his from his hand. Then, with calculated grace, she ran a single finger across his lips, tugging at his lower lip as if she was testing his final line of resistance. Jabari's breathing grew heavy. His heart pounded. Every part of him wanted to say no, except the parts that didn't. Anne leaned in for a kiss, and just before their lips met, Jabari turned away. "I can't. I'm married," he said, the words breaking out in a hoarse whisper. "I can't do this." But Anne, relentless and dangerous, looked straight into his soul. Her hands moved with purpose as she began to unbutton his shirt, one button at a time. "I'm not here to take her place, Jabari," she whispered, her voice like velvet wrapped around a dagger. "I just want to make you happy. Right here. Right now. Don't think. Just feel." Then she kissed him, slowly, deeply, and Jabari gave in. That night, Anne was no ordinary lover. She became a force, wild, dominant, sensual. She handled Jabari like she had known his body her whole life. Every move, every sound, every touch was calculated, perfect, intense. Jabari had never experienced anything like it. He was lost completely in her. Zuri, his faithful wife, was nowhere in his mind. But if only he knew that what he thought was the most thrilling experience of his life was also the most dangerous. If only he had known that Anne was HIV positive, that she had walked into his life with a deadly secret tucked behind those pretty lips and flirtatious eyes. After hours, 3 long, intense hours, Anne drifted off to sleep beside him, a soft, satisfied sigh escaping her lips. Jabari, exhausted and emotionally wrecked, lay on his back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The silence was deafening. Reality crept back in like a slow fog, wrapping around him in guilt and dread. He whispered into the dark, voice cracking under the weight of regret. "What have I just done?" Somewhere far away, Zuri, loyal, patient Zuri, was probably wondering if her husband had eaten, if he was resting after work, or if he had missed her voice that night. If only she knew. A stitch in time saves 9, but in Jabari's case, the thread had already snapped. The damage was done. He wanted to cry, he wanted to scream, but more than anything, he wanted to rewind time. Instead, he just closed his eyes and tried to find sleep, but sleep came with a price. In his dream, he was lying on a hospital bed. Bright white lights glared above him. The room was full of doctors and nurses in pale scrubs, their voices murmuring in tones too low to make out. Machines beeped all around him. His body, frail, pale, and unrecognizable, was being poked, tested, and monitored. His hands were trembling. His lips were dry. His strength gone. He wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but his voice was caught in his throat. Then one of the nurses leaned over and whispered in his ear, "You should have stayed faithful." Jabari jolted up, gasping, drenched in cold sweat. "No, no," he screamed, clutching his chest, breath ragged. Beside him, Anne stirred and sat up slowly, startled by his outburst. "Are you okay? You scared me," she said, blinking in the dim light of the room. Jabari's eyes darted around, disoriented. The hospital bed was gone, the beeping machines gone, just the expensive hotel suite now, and the scent of last night's sin still heavy in the air. "I'm all right," he said quietly, brushing off the fear that was clinging to his skin. Just go back to sleep." Anne shrugged, rolled over, and soon drifted back into slumber. But Jabari couldn't. His mind was now a prison, echoing with voices of regret, flashes of Zuri's smile, and the chilling vision of what could await him. He didn't sleep again that night. At dawn, soft light crept through the curtains. Anne sat up, stretched, and began quietly gathering her things. She always left early. She had her reasons, not that she ever shared them. The truth was, she needed to rush home to take her antiretroviral drugs. Missing a dose wasn't an option, and carrying them around risked exposure. She was careful, always careful, because her entire strategy depended on secrecy. Anne believed that as long as she played her cards right, no one would ever know. As she slipped into her heels and reached for her bag, Jabari was still awake, watching her from the bed, eyes red, heart aching. "Heading out?" he asked softly. "Yes, got somewhere to be." That morning, just before Anne left the hotel room, Jabari had reached into his wallet and pulled out a thick wad of cash. He pressed it into her hand without much thought. "For transportation and your upkeep," he said quietly, avoiding her eyes. Anne smiled as she took the money, not just any smile, but one of quiet triumph. She leaned in and kissed him deeply on the lips, a kiss that tasted of satisfaction and power. Then, without another word, she turned and left. With Anne gone, reality began to sink in. The air no longer smelled like perfume and sin, just stale regret. Jabari moved quickly, anxious to get back home. The business trip that had taken him away from the city was officially over, and now he needed to return to the life he had momentarily escaped, to Zuri. At around 1:17 p.m., the doorbell rang at their house. The house help, in her apron and headscarf, quickly rushed to open the door. "Welcome, sir," she greeted politely, reaching for his briefcase. "Thank you," Jabari replied, stepping inside. "Where's my wife?" "She went out this morning and hasn't returned yet," the girl answered. Jabari nodded and reached into his pocket for his phone. He dialed Zuri's number. She picked up quickly. "Hey, baby. Where are you? I'm back home," he said, trying to sound casual. "I had an important meeting at the office, and I also have a doctor's appointment today," Zuri replied, her voice calm. "Okay, just try to come home when you're done. I'm around now," he said. After a few more words, the call ended. Jabari went upstairs to take a shower. The guilt clung to his skin like sweat. He scrubbed hard, trying to wash off what he had done, but no soap could cleanse that kind of stain. Later, he came downstairs to eat. The food barely had any taste. He forced it down anyway. As he tried to relax on the couch, his phone buzzed. The screen lit up, and his heart dropped. He hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly picked up. "Hello, how are you?" he asked stiffly. "I'm fine," Anne replied. "I just miss you." Jabari sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Listen, you shouldn't be calling me unless I call you first. I'm at home now. I'll call you later," he said firmly and ended the call. Anne stared at her phone for a while, stunned. Her heart sank, though she tried to hide the ache behind a bitter smile. She was nothing but a chapter to Jabari, a temporary thrill. Still, she didn't react. She had too many secrets herself to be throwing stones. Shortly after, the doorbell rang again. It was Zuri. She walked in gracefully, tired but still radiant in her natural way. Jabari immediately went to her and wrapped her in a warm hug. He held her longer than usual, guilt weighing heavy on his shoulders. "Look who's back," Zuri teased lightly. "I thought you were supposed to be gone all week." "I was," Jabari replied with a smile. "But I managed to finish up early, so here I am." Their reunion was full of mixed emotions. On the surface, there was warmth, but beneath it, tension crackled quietly. Zuri freshened up and handled a few things before getting ready for bed. Later that night, Jabari, feeling emotionally torn and still craving closeness, reached out to her. But she pulled away. "Babe, not today," she said flatly, her back turned to him. "I had a long day, and honestly, I'm not happy with you, with this marriage." Jabari froze. Her words pierced deep. "What do you mean? Is there something wrong with our marriage?" he asked, confused and defensive. Zuri turned to him, her eyes tired but firm. She didn't shout. Her voice carried a deep, simmering disappointment. "What makes you think we're okay?" she asked bitterly. "You barely spend time with me. You're married to your job. I see you once in a while, like a guest passing through. How are we supposed to build a home this way?" She paused, her voice beginning to tremble. "We've been married for 2 years, Jabari. 2 whole years. No child, no plan, no consistency. And you want to talk about intimacy? How can I be in the mood when I feel invisible?" Jabari's lips parted, but no words came out. "I don't even trust you anymore," Zuri added, her voice barely a whisper now. "You're not the man I married. I don't know who you are anymore. Please, just leave me alone. I want to sleep." With that, she turned away from him and curled up on her side of the bed. Jabari laid there, staring at the back of the woman he had betrayed, the woman whose heart was slowly growing colder toward him. He could feel it, but what he didn't yet know was that this was only the beginning. The next morning, after a long, restless night of guilt, fear, and regret, Jabari woke up determined to fix his marriage. But how could he rebuild something so broken when the very thing causing the cracks, his work, remained a constant? He tried to speak to Zuri that morning, to hold her hand, to apologize for being distant. But just as he was about to start the conversation, his phone rang. It was his boss, an urgent 3-day assignment. He hesitated for a moment, then said yes. Zuri stood nearby, watching with hollow eyes. Her heart cracked quietly again. She had hoped for something different that morning, but clearly nothing had changed. She didn't say much as he packed. She didn't need to. The silence between them said it all. Jabari returned to the same city he had just left, checked into the same hotel, slipped back into the same routine. Business meetings, reports, networking dinners. But this time, the weight he carried felt heavier. That evening, drained from the day, Jabari laid on the hotel bed, his thoughts spiraling. His eyes stared at the ceiling, mind torn between Zuri, the looming dread of disease, and a woman he wished he had never met. His phone rang. It was Anne. He sighed deeply and picked up. "Hello, dear," he said wearily. "Hi," Anne replied, voice soft. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, thanks for asking." But Anne could hear it, the fatigue, the guilt, the distance. She paused for a beat. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "Yeah, I am," he replied, trying to sound casual. But the hollowness in his voice betrayed him. "I can tell something's wrong," she pressed. "Where are you right now?" "I'm in my hotel room," he answered. "I thought you said you were back home," she questioned, clearly surprised. "What are you still doing there?" "Well, I had to come back for some unfinished business," he said flatly. Anne was quiet for a moment, then came the bombshell. "I'm coming over." Jabari sat up quickly. "Anne, no, you don't need to." "I've made up my mind," she interrupted. "I want to see you, just for a little while." "No, Anne, it's not a good time. I'm already getting ready." "I'll be there soon," she said, and ended the call before he could argue further. In her rush to prepare, Anne picked up a random bag from her room, one she often carried when traveling. She threw in a few things: makeup, lotion, a pair of heels, a simple dress to change into later. In her haste, she didn't realize she had forgotten to remove a small white-labeled container of antiretroviral drugs that had been sitting quietly in the corner pocket. The bag zipped closed, and off she went, completely unaware that her biggest secret was coming along for the ride. Jabari, on the other hand, was pacing back and forth in his hotel room. His mind raced. Why was she coming? What did she want? Would he be strong enough to resist her this time? He felt trapped, paralyzed, not knowing that in just a few moments, the truth he feared most would come knocking, literally, at his hotel door. A few hours later, Anne arrived at the hotel looking radiant and carefree. She knocked softly, and Jabari, still battling his guilt and confusion, opened the door. A subtle smile crept onto his face. He didn't mean to smile, but there was something about not being alone that calmed the storm inside him, even if only briefly. "Hey," she said, stepping in. "Hey," he replied, masking his mixed emotions. They ordered food and spent the next hour eating and talking about random topics, laughing lightly, as though the weight of sin hadn't darkened every corner of that room just days ago. Anne freshened up, changed into something more comfortable, and returned to the room glowing. The atmosphere began to shift. Jabari tried to fight it. Truly, he did. But Zuri's rejection from the night before still echoed in his mind. His craving for connection, for release, overpowered his logic. Slowly, deliberately, they gave in to the familiar rhythm of lust, slipping into each other's arms like a bad habit. Hours later, exhausted from another round of passionate betrayal, they lay tangled on the bed, their breathing slow and heavy. The next morning, Jabari woke up first. He had an early meeting and needed to prepare quickly. As he stood before the dresser mirror, applying his face cream and adjusting his tie, something caught his eye. A small, shiny container peeking from Anne's half-open bag on top of the cupboard. He tried to ignore it, but curiosity, or perhaps instinct, wouldn't let him. He stepped over, opened the bag a bit wider, and picked up the container. His heart dropped. Antiretroviral capsule. The words glared back at him like a curse. Time froze. His breath caught in his throat. The sound of his own heartbeat pounded louder than the city traffic below. He could barely stand. His fingers began to tremble. His knees weakened. HIV? No, it can't be, he gasped, stepping back like the container had burned him. Panic gripped him like a noose. His mind raced. Images of Zuri, their home, the night he first met Anne, the passion, the risk. He clutched his chest and dropped onto the edge of the bed, the horror spreading like wildfire. It was too much to process. He turned to the bed. Anne was still asleep, peaceful, innocent-looking. as though she hadn't just turned his world upside down. Jabari snapped. "Anne, hey, wake up," he shouted, shaking her shoulder with urgency. Anne stirred, confused, slowly opening her eyes. As her vision cleared, she saw it, the container in Jabari's hand. The color drained from her face. "What's this drug for?" "Why do you have it with you?" Jabari demanded, his voice sharp and shaking. Anne sat up, heart racing, unable to speak. She could feel the floor of her lies collapsing beneath her. "I'm waiting," Jabari said louder now. "Answer me." Silence, then again, silence. Finally, in a trembling voice, she whispered, "They're mine." Jabari's jaw dropped. "Okay, but why do you have them? What are you not telling me, Anne?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Words wouldn't form. Her body trembled, her hands fidgeted, her lips quivered. "Speak up," Jabari barked. "Don't make me call the police. If you don't tell me the truth right now, I swear." Tears welled up in Anne's eyes. Her voice barely audible, she confessed, "I'm HIV positive, but you don't need to be scared. I take my medication daily, so the risk of passing it to you is very low." The room went still, the kind of stillness that comes before destruction. Jabari stepped back, disgusted and enraged. "What the hell did you just say? Are you out of your mind? You knew, and you didn't tell me. You thought your drugs gave you the right to gamble with someone's life, with my life." Anne burst into tears, trying to speak, to explain, but Jabari was far beyond listening. "My God, I could be HIV positive right now, all because of you." He picked up his phone and took a quick photo of her. "If I test positive, you're not walking away from this. I'll find you, and I'll make sure you face the law. Get out of my room. Now, before I lose every ounce of patience I have left." Anne, humiliated and sobbing, dressed as fast as she could. She didn't say a word, she just left, her footsteps sounding like thunder in Jabari's ears. Minutes after the door closed, the room went eerily quiet. Jabari collapsed onto the bed, his hands on his head, eyes wide, heart still pounding. His entire body felt cold, not from the air conditioning, but from fear. Deep, terrifying fear. He bent his head low, his elbows on his knees. Tears threatened to fall, but he fought them back. His mind was spinning out of control. Every second felt like a countdown to destruction. What would he tell Zuri? What would he do if the test came back positive? His entire life had flipped in less than 48 hours. And the worst part, he had done this to himself. Regret, guilt, terror. They all came crashing down at once. And now only one question haunted him like a demon in the dark. What if it's too late? He couldn't attend to his work obligations. He wasn't in the right frame of mind to do anything. There was only one thought that haunted him every minute of the day. Am I HIV positive? The guilt, the shame, the anxiety, it all came crashing down like a tidal wave. He opened his laptop and his phone, Googling obsessively. All day long, Jabari scoured the internet for answers, reading articles, medical journals, blog posts, and forums. He read about viral loads, about ARV adherence, about undetectable equals untransmittable, and about the exceptions that still made the risk real. But rather than calm his fears, every article seemed to deepen the hole in his chest. He was spiraling. His thoughts became darker. His silence grew deeper. Jabari cancelled all his meetings and calls, telling his assistant he was ill. He stayed locked inside the hotel, blinds drawn, lights dim. He didn't eat much. He ignored his phone, especially Zuri's calls. He couldn't bring himself to lie to her anymore, but he wasn't ready to tell her the truth either. For days, he lived like a ghost, drifting through hours, empty-eyed, mentally crippled by fear. And still, he hadn't gone to the hospital. He wasn't ready for the answer. He wasn't ready for the truth. He was terrified of it. Each night, he laid in bed, his eyes wide open long after midnight. "I was such a jerk," he whispered one night, staring up at the ceiling as tears rolled quietly down his cheeks. "How the hell did I get here? I had a good woman, loyal, faithful, a home, and I let lust and ego destroy everything. God, what if this test comes out positive? What am I supposed to do? How do I face my wife, my family? My life is over. Too bad life doesn't give rewinds. Too bad regret never fixes anything." Finally, after nearly a week of silent suffering, Jabari reached his breaking point. He knew he couldn't keep hiding. With trembling hands, he picked up his keys and left the hotel. The drive to the hospital was slow and suffocating. Every stoplight felt like judgment. Every turn reminded him of his mistakes. His mouth was dry, and his hands wouldn't stop sweating. As he neared the hospital gates, he whispered one last desperate prayer. God, please, please let it be negative. Please give me a second chance. At the reception, a calm-looking nurse smiled and asked, "Good day, sir. How may we help you?" Jabari's voice was barely audible. "I want to run a complete checkup, HIV test included." She nodded and gave him a number. "Please take a seat. You'll be called in shortly." Minutes later, he was in the lab. Blood was drawn. Forms were filled. He was told to return the next day for his results. But Jabari couldn't wait. He was on the edge of madness. He paid handsomely, offering a rush fee no one in the hospital would ever forget, and pleaded for the process to be expedited. By some miracle, the team agreed. He was told to return in the evening. That afternoon, Jabari wandered around aimlessly. He sat at a cafe but didn't order, walked through a park but didn't see the trees. He couldn't focus, couldn't think, couldn't breathe properly. The same man who once dined with CEOs and spoke confidently on live television was now reduced to a nervous wreck, roaming outside a hospital like a lost soul, waiting for a verdict. When evening finally came, he returned to the hospital and was led into the doctor's office. The air felt thick and cold. One look at the doctor's face, and Jabari knew something was wrong. "Hello, sir. Please have a seat," the doctor said with a solemn tone. Jabari sat, his body stiff. "I want to first tell you that you shouldn't be afraid," the doctor began, "because it isn't as bad as people think." The words hit Jabari like ice water. His heartbeat spiked. Will Jabari test positive, or will fate grant him one last chance? The answer awaits in part 2. Subscribe to Loreroom so you don't miss the moment that could change everything.